Hello and welcome to this edition of Arts 24. Part portrait, part optical illusion, the eye-popping photos of Thandiwe Muriu are as bright as they are beguiling. Using both vibrant textiles and everyday household objects, her work tackles questions of identity, value, and womanhood in modern Kenya. She burst onto the art scene just 3 years ago, completely self-taught, and she's here in Paris for her first major solo show, which opens this week at the 193 Gallery. It's called You Thought You Could Throw Me Away. Thandiwe Muriu, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Now, this exhibition features your original Camo portraits and 2 new series of photos as well. It's really a showcase of your journey as an artist so far, which has not been a long one. Can you tell the story of how it all began 3 years ago?
Well, before 3 years ago, my father introduced me to photography, and he put a camera in my hand, and I just never put it down, is what I like to say. I was completely just smitten with photography, and it was a way to process my world that I just couldn't quite articulate with words. So 3 years ago, in the middle of COVID, I get this message from a gallery, and it was COVID, so it felt like just the world felt like it was ending. And so I thought, I don't know about this gallery thing. I've never done this before, but, let's try new things. The world's gonna end anyways. It was the best yes, I said. They asked to show the series that I'm known for, Camo, which was personal work that I had developed for myself. And it went from there.
And what led you to develop that work for yourself?
So part of my journey involved becoming the first female commercial photographer in Kenya. And what's unique about that is Kenya can be a very patriarchal society, much like, a lot of societies around the world. And the moment my dad put a camera in my hands, I knew this was what I was meant to do. But it wasn't something women typically did. If you wanted to be a photographer, you would become a family photographer or a wedding photographer as a woman. And I knew I didn't want to record stories, I wanted to create. And so it felt like the 2 options available to me were fashion photography and commercial advertising photography. Of course, I wanted to do fashion. I'm a woman, but I quickly discovered that maybe it's difficult to make a living doing fashion photography in a third world country. So for practical reasons, I kind of ended up in commercial photography. And being the only woman in that space really made me deeply question who I was. Am I still desirable if I go against what culture defines for me as a woman? Am I still feminine if I'm doing what the culture views as masculine or a job for men? Do I add value by doing that instead of doing something more traditional? And these were questions that I struggled and wrestled with, even as I was doing what I knew I loved. And so this project kind of became a visual journal for me to celebrate and highlight what unconventional strength and beauty looks like in women. One of the amazing things about this journey is I realized it's not just me struggling with these questions, it's women everywhere. And so there's been comfort in sharing this letter, this love letter that I've written to myself with other women. And it's gone from being a love letter to myself to a love letter to all women.
Yeah, I was going to say those questions are questions that we've all struggled with. Your work resonates with so many people, particularly women all over the world. I want to hear from the curator of this exhibition, Marie-Lou Ngweseke, talking about what she loves about your work.
There's a lot of color, a lot of energy in her pieces, but also some hidden qualities. She uses this camouflage effect that forces us to question ourselves, especially our role as women in contemporary society. However, there is also a lot of joy in Thandiwe's discourse. It shows that we can talk about current affairs, but with a smile.
I love the joy. Another thing I love about your portraits is the way the subjects sort of both blend in and stand out, which I think is a dual urge that many women feel as well. What do you want viewers to take away from your work?
I want these to be empowering portraits of women. I think it's very easy for us to be historically objectified or painted as very soft, but these are strong women. And I think every woman has a deep strength within her that sometimes we don't celebrate. But it's one of the amazing things about womanhood, especially in the context that I come from. I want to redeem something that is not viewed as valuable and bring it to the surface and show its amazing value, which is why I use objects. I use simple objects like bottle caps, like combs. They're things you would never pay attention to, but I reimagine them in a way that they stop you in your tracks. And that's kind of the experience of being a woman. We are so quick to dismiss ourselves, to belittle ourselves. I want women to be emboldened by looking at my work and take a new sense of pride in themselves, to redeem their self-value.
Yeah, and you really do have to look closely to realize kind of what those glasses are made out of. The outfits are also incredible. You make all of the clothes and accessories in collaboration with local designers. Can you talk about how that process works? Do you design the clothes yourself?
So I design the clothes. That is the fashion photographer in me finding an outlet, I think. But I design the clothes and then I work with local tailors in Nairobi to make them. This is very much a cultural process. In Kenya, the cloth that I use called Ankara, you buy it in yards and then you go and kind of co-design with your tailor an outfit that would look good on you. And so I am respecting my culture even as I create art about it. And this is the most fun part of this process.
And one of your new series is called Prized Possessions. It's inspired by Kenyan barber shops, and there's a lot of symbolism going on there as well.
So speaking about objects, as I've kind of created the objects in the Camo series, I began to think more and more about the power that an object holds in a culture. And just objects are such a strong form of social commentary. What do we value? Why do we value it? And I think as people, we have this need, this urge to collect and obsess over things. And prized possessions kind of looked at what do we obsess about as cultures and what does that say about us?
Yeah, hair is definitely something that I can tend to obsess about. Are these symbolic hairstyles that you chose to represent as well?
I tend to take historical hairstyles and give them a little bit of a modern twist. I call it modernizing history because I think one of the things we've lost in our quest for beauty and identity as women and cultures in general is appreciating what was. And there's the urge to reject it. And so I want to bring it back in a new way so that we're not losing our history, even as we're progressing. Even as I am a modern woman in a traditional context, it doesn't mean I lose my connection to the past. It maybe means that I form a kind of new mix between modernism and tradition. And that's kind of what I try and do with the hair, bringing two worlds together.
And speaking of modernizing history, your newest series, Woven Voices, is one that you're still currently working on. It's going to be presented at next year's Venice Biennial, and it's about self-representation in the wake of colonialism.
So again, from Camo, I worked with objects, but then I was looking at the question of identity as a woman, and I began to reflect on identity as community, identity as a whole. And if I struggle with my self-worth as a woman, do communities struggle with self-worth? And I felt a resounding yes. I think because of the historical context of Kenya and many other countries, we tend to see ourselves as of lesser value. And I wanted to examine and question this and see if by redeeming a stamp, which is a symbol of where the heart of a nation was in a period of time, if I redeem that, can I go back to the source of this loss of self-value and make us value ourselves more by addressing some of the questions we had then in today's context.
Yeah, and you reimagine those colonial stamps using kanga, which is fabric that tends to have messages written on it. Your work is often also accompanied by African proverbs. I'm wondering if you can talk about what you love about proverbs and maybe recite one of your favorites if one comes to mind.
I have many favorites, but partly working with a kanga, for example, it's called a cloth that speaks because it has words on it as part of its makeup. And words can be so empowering. The kanga was a cloth typically designed by women in East Africa, and it became a way for women to speak in a culture that required them to be silent. And it's an empowering cloth. And I think proverbs capture the wisdom of generations before us. Proverbs are a way to speak without offending, but to speak clearly. So some of my favorites, because of course I'm always focused on womanhood. I love one that says, "A diamond does not lose its value due to lack of admiration." Or another one that says, "When your sister does your hair, you do not need a mirror.
I love that one, and I remember reading it earlier when I was reading about your work. You're also going to be part of a group exhibition that's coming up in Kenya at the Gerda Institute in Nairobi, African Women in Photography. And I understand that as an artist, it's really important to you to remain working in Kenya.
Yes, I'm so excited about this exhibition because it is curated by an East African and it features only East African artists, all women. The curator is a woman. And for me, it's just everything I want to see. It is women finding their voice, taking their space in new spaces that typically didn't include them. So very excited about this. I'm passionate about producing in Kenya because for many years, the imagery coming out of the continent, coming out of the region was very much one of poverty and struggle. And yes, that is a big reality with where I come from, but it's not the whole story. And there is joy, there is beauty, there is deep community, even in these circumstances. And I want to highlight that about my culture. We are more than the narrow definition that kind of the world sees.
Thandiwe, I think you and your work highlight it so well. Thank you again so much for being with us here on France 24. A reminder that her work, you can see her show, You Thought You Could Throw Me Away, at the 193 Gallery here in Paris. We're going to end with a look at an upcoming art and design fair in Paris that Thandiwe took part in actually last year. It is called ACA, also known as Africa. It features African artists from both the continent and the diaspora, and it's running from the 19th to the 22nd of October. Thank you so much for watching. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.